The move was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance to shed my small-town skin and embrace city life. The apartment had been a rushed find, a last-minute stroke of luck in a rental market that offered little mercy. It was old, yes, but spacious, and the rent was almost suspiciously affordable. Still, I didn't question my fortune, at least not at first. The landlord, a wiry man with a perpetually wary expression, handed me the keys on the day I moved in. He hesitated, his fingers clutching the keyring just a second too long before letting go. "Hope you'll be comfortable here," he said, his tone strained. "If you hear anything strange, well, these old buildings make all kinds of noises. Creaks, thuds, that sort of thing." His eyes darted to the darkened hallway behind me, then back to my face. "Just don't think too much of it." I chalked it up to the quirks of dealing with eccentric city folk. That first night, I unpacked to the soothing sound of rain pattering against the window, feeling content. I'd made it. My first place, all to myself. But as the hours stretched on and the rain turned into a downpour, the move was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance to shed my small-town skin and embrace city life. The apartment had been a rushed find, a last-minute stroke of luck in a rental market that offered little mercy. It was old, yes, but spacious, and the rent was almost suspiciously affordable. Still, I didn't question my fortune, at least not at first. The landlord, a wiry man with a perpetually wary expression, handed me the keys on the day I moved in. He hesitated, his fingers clutching the keyring just a second too long before letting go. "Hope you'll be comfortable here," he said, his tone strained. "If you hear anything strange, well, these old buildings make all kinds of noises. Creaks, thuds, that sort of thing." His eyes darted to the darkened hallway behind me, then back to my face. "Just don't think too much of it." I chalked it up to the quirks of dealing with eccentric city folk. That first night, I unpacked to the soothing sound of rain pattering against the window, feeling content. I'd made it. My first place, all to myself. But as the hours stretched on and the rain turned into a downpour, the silence of the building began to weigh on me. It wasn't just quiet. It was oppressively still, like the walls were holding their breath. I told myself it was nerves. New spaces always felt strange at first. The first odd occurrence was minor, barely worth noting. The bathroom light flickered as I brushed my teeth before bed. I tapped the switch, and the flickering stopped. I moved on, dismissing it as a bulb on its last legs. Around 3 a.m., I awoke to a sound above me, a slow, deliberate creak like footsteps on floorboards. My heart leapt. There was no apartment above mine. I was on the top floor. I sat upright, straining to listen. Nothing. Just the rain and the occasional groan of the old pipes. I told myself I'd imagined it, that the sound had traveled from somewhere else in the building. But as I lay back down, the unease lingered. The next few nights I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Shadows in the corners of my vision seemed darker, denser, refusing to disperse no matter how many lights I turned on. I dismissed it as stress, adjusting to city life, the new job, the unfamiliar noises of an old building settling. But the footsteps came back, always in the dead of night, always slow and measured, as if whoever or whatever was making them wanted to savor each step. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe there was an attic, and I just didn't know about it. Maybe the landlord had a storage space up there and hadn't bothered to tell me. One evening, as I cooked dinner, I noticed a crack in the kitchen wall near the counter. It hadn't been there before. At least, I didn't think it had. Curious, I leaned in to inspect it, running my fingers along its jagged edges. That's when I saw it, a slip of paper wedged deep within the crack. I fished it out, careful not to tear it. The paper was old, yellowed with age, and the handwriting was shaky, almost frantic. 3 short sentences. He won't leave me alone. He's always watching. Don't let him in. A chill raced down my spine. My first instinct was to laugh it off as some weird prank. Maybe the previous tenant had an odd sense of humor. But there was something about the writing, the desperate scratches of the pen, that made it feel authentic. That night, I dreamed of her. She was sitting on the edge of my bed, her back to me, her shoulders hunched and trembling. Her hair hung in limp, wet strands, and her pale hands gripped the blanket tightly. "He was always here," she whispered without turning around. Her voice was thin, barely audible, like the hiss of wind through cracked windows. "He belongs to the apartment." I woke up with a start, my chest heaving, the sheets damp with sweat. My bedside lamp flickered, and for one heart-stopping moment, I thought I saw a figure standing in the doorway. When I blinked, it was gone. The next morning, I told myself it was a nightmare, nothing more. But deep down, I knew better. The footsteps had grown louder. The whispers had started, faint, unintelligible murmurs that seemed to come from the walls. Something was here with me, something that wasn't going to leave. The footsteps were no longer confined to the ceiling. They roamed the apartment now, heavy and deliberate, pacing just beyond the reach of the light. I tried to ignore them, convincing myself I was hearing things, but each night they grew closer. One evening, as I sat in the living room scrolling aimlessly on my phone, a sudden bang echoed from the kitchen. My heart lurched. Tentatively, I approached, finding the cabinet door beneath the sink hanging open. Its contents, sponges, cleaning sprays, a box of trash bags, lay scattered on the floor. I gathered the items, trying to suppress the chill creeping up my spine. But as I reached to shut the cabinet, my hand froze. Inside, scratched faintly into the wood, were the words, "He watches from the mirror." I slammed the cabinet shut and stumbled back, bumping into the counter. My breath came in shallow gasps, my pulse pounding in my ears. I didn't understand what was happening, but I knew I needed answers. Determined, I started searching the apartment for anything that might explain the growing unease. Hours passed as I rummaged through closets, drawers, and corners that hadn't been touched in years. It was just before midnight when I found it. A small, battered box tucked deep into a crawl space above the bathroom. Inside were old photographs and a leather-bound journal, its cover cracked and worn. The photograph showed a woman in her 30s, smiling at first, then progressively haggard and hollow-eyed in the later snapshots. The last picture made my stomach turn. She was standing in my living room, her head turned slightly toward the mirror, her reflection absent. I opened the journal with trembling hands. The entries started mundane, notes about work, friends, day-to-day life. But as I flipped through, the tone changed. The handwriting grew erratic, the words frantic. "There's something in the apartment. I feel it watching me when I sleep. He speaks through the walls at night, whispers I can't understand. He doesn't want me to leave. I can't do this anymore. I can't sleep. He's always there, just out of sight, waiting." The final entry was short, scrawled as if in a hurry. "He's in the mirror. I see him now. He won't let me leave. Don't let him in." A cold sweat broke out on my skin. My gaze flickered to the bathroom mirror. It was perfectly still, reflecting only the dim light of the overhead bulb. And yet I couldn't shake the feeling that if I stared long enough, something would move. That night, I slept with the lights on, clutching the journal like a talisman. But sleep didn't come. The footsteps returned, heavier than before, circling my bed. The whispers were louder now, a constant, unintelligible murmur that seemed to pulse through the walls. I couldn't stay passive anymore. The presence was becoming too real, too aggressive. I researched ways to deal with spirits, desperate for a solution. The articles I read suggested rituals, candles, salt, prayers. It sounded ridiculous, but I was willing to try anything. On the third night after finding the journal, I gathered supplies, a ring of salt, a few candles, and a lighter. I didn't know what I was doing, but I followed the steps as best I could. With shaking hands, I lit the candles and stood in the center of the salt circle in the living room. "I don't know who you are," I said, my voice trembling. "But you don't belong here anymore. You need to leave." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the temperature in the room dropped sharply. The candles flickered, their flames bending as if caught in a gust of wind. Though the air was still, the shadows in the room seemed to thicken, pooling in the corners and creeping toward me. And then, he appeared. At first, it was just a shape, a silhouette, barely visible against the flickering light. But as I stared, his form solidified. A pale, gaunt figure with hollow eyes that burned like dying embers. His mouth twisted into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You're in my home," he said, his voice deep and resonant like the groan of ancient wood. I backed away instinctively, nearly breaking the salt circle. "This isn't your home anymore," I managed, my voice barely a whisper. The figure stepped closer, his movements slow but purposeful. The shadows seemed to follow him, clinging to his form like a second skin. "You think you can make me leave?" he said, his tone dripping with disdain. Summoning every ounce of courage, I began reciting a prayer I'd memorized earlier. The figure recoiled slightly, his form flickering like a bad signal. The candles flared brightly, then extinguished all at once, plunging the room into darkness. I scrambled to relight them, but the figure lunged, his face inches from mine. "You think you're safe?" he hissed, his breath cold against my skin. A sudden burst of light illuminated the room as I managed to relight a candle. The figure shrieked, his form dissolving into smoke that swirled violently before vanishing. The room fell silent, the oppressive weight lifting slightly. I thought I had won. For the first time in weeks, the apartment felt quiet. The heavy, oppressive air was gone, replaced by a fragile stillness. I sank to the floor, trembling, the extinguished candles scattered around me. I should have felt relief, but unease clung to me like a second skin. The next day I began packing. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow flickering in the corner of my eye set my nerves on edge. I refused to stay another night. By evening, most of my belongings were boxed, stacked neatly by the door. But as the sun dipped below the horizon and the apartment grew dim, the sense of safety I'd clung to all day began to unravel. A soft hum reached my ears, faint at first, like the buzz of distant electricity. It came from the living room mirror. My stomach churned as I approached it. The surface seemed normal, reflecting the faint light from the single lamp I'd left on. And yet, there was something wrong. Something I couldn't quite put into words. I leaned closer, hesitating. For a moment I thought I saw my reflection move slightly out of sync with me. A twitch of the lip, a tilt of the head. I stepped back, heart hammering. A loud knock broke the silence, making me jump. It came from the front door. My landlord stood there, his expression grim. "Thought I should check in," he muttered, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. His eyes roved over the packed boxes, then landed on the mirror. "So you've seen..."